Daniel Harper did not expect anything unusual when he came home that evening, but the house felt different the moment he stepped inside. It's quieter in a way that pressed on his chest, and as he set his jacket down, he noticed a small gift bag on the dining table that did not belong to any date he could remember, pale blue with a silver ribbon tied too carefully to be random. And he stood there longer than he should have, thinking of Emily, his wife, the woman who used to tell him everything. From small work worries to childhood stories, yet lately had grown softer and more distant at the same time, like someone walking carefully across thin ice. And without fully deciding to do it, he reached into the bag and pulled out a tiny bracelet meant for a baby. Smooth and light, engraved with a date that did not match any plan they had ever made, and his breath caught as he felt a slow heat rise in his face. Confusion turning into fear, because under the bracelet was a folded paper with a logo he recognized. From late-night ads, a private testing lab. And when he opened it, his hands shook enough that the paper rustled loudly in the quiet room. The words simple and clear, a request for a paternity test. And Daniel felt as if the floor had tilted under him, memories rushing in all at once. The talks they had about someday, the careful way Emily had spoken about children, hopeful but cautious, never rushed. And he tried to tell himself there was a reasonable answer. There had to be, yet his mind ran ahead of him, filling the silence with questions he did not want to ask. And he sat down hard in the chair, staring at the bracelet like it might speak, like it might explain itself, but it stayed still, shining under the kitchen light. And when Emily came home later with a tired smile and groceries in her arms, Daniel watched her from across the room and felt the strange distance between them stretch wider. Her voice warm as she asked about his day, her eyes searching his face for something he did not know how to give, and he answered in short lines, careful not to let his voice shake, careful not to let the moment break open before he understood. It himself! And as they ate dinner, he noticed small things he had ignored before. The way she touched her necklace when she was nervous. The way she paused before answering simple questions. And each small thing added weight to the fear sitting in his chest. But he said nothing, choosing silence over a fight he did not yet know how to have. And that night in bed, he lay awake listening to the steady rhythm of Emily's breathing while his own thoughts raced, wondering how a marriage could feel solid for years and then suddenly feel like glass. Wondering what part of her life he had never been allowed to see. And when sleep finally came, it was shallow and broken, filled with half-formed dreams and sharp waking moments. And by morning, Daniel had already decided he would not ask her yet. Not until he had something firm in his hands. Not until his questions had answers that did not rely on guesses or fear. And after Emily left for work, he returned to the table, picked up the paper again, and read it once more with clearer eyes. Noting dates, instructions, small details meant to sound calm and professional. And he felt a strange mix of guilt and resolve as he followed the steps, ordering his own test quietly, telling himself it was not about mistrust but about truth, even though part of him knew trust was already wounded. And as he sealed the envelope later that day, he paused, thinking of the life they had built, the small routines that had once felt unbreakable, and he realized that whatever the result would be, he could never go back to the man who had walked into the house the night before without fear. And as he dropped the envelope into the mailbox, he felt the weight of the choice settle over him. Heavy and final, the future suddenly uncertain, the past full of questions, and the space between him and Emily filled with words neither of them had yet spoken, setting the stage for a truth that would not wait much longer to be known. The days after Daniel sent the test felt unreal, as if time had sped up while his mind lagged behind. And every morning he woke with the same tight feeling in his chest. forcing himself through routines that no longer felt natural. Driving to work, answering emails, nodding through meetings while his thoughts stayed fixed on the small envelope already moving through the system. And at home, he watched Emily closely, noticing how she tried harder than usual, cooking his favorite meals, asking gentle questions, offering small smiles that felt careful, almost fragile. And each kind gesture only deepened his confusion because he could not tell whether it came from love or from guilt. And the waiting became its own kind of test, stretching his patience and draining his energy. And when the email finally arrived one afternoon while he sat alone in his car at a quiet highway stop, Daniel knew before opening it that nothing would be the same again. His hands steady but his heart racing as he read the result that confirmed what he feared. The child was not his, the words plain and final. And he sat there in silence as the weight of them settled over him. Not in anger, but in a hollow ache that made his chest feel empty, and memories rose without warning. The early days of their marriage, the shared dreams spoken late at night, the trust he had given freely. And he realized that what hurt most was not the idea of another man, but the fact that Emily had carried a truth he never knew. And without going home, he started the engine and drove, leaving the familiar streets behind, the city lights blurring as he pushed forward. Needing distance from the house that now felt full of unanswered questions, and he stopped only when exhaustion took over, pulling into a roadside motel that looked forgotten by time. Its sign flickering weakly against the dark sky, and inside the room the air smelled of cleaning spray and old carpet. But it was quiet, and that was enough. And he sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his phone, the screen lighting up with a message from Emily asking where he was, her words polite but worried, and he turned the phone face down, not ready to hear explanations or apologies, not ready to speak without breaking. And as night settled in, he replayed every recent moment, wondering when the shift had happened, whether there had been signs he chose to ignore. And though part of him wanted to confront her, to demand answers immediately, another part felt too tired to fight, choosing distance instead. And hours later, when his phone vibrated again with a simple request to talk, Daniel closed his eyes, feeling the pull between love and self-protection, and he stayed silent, watching the shadows move across the wall as cars passed outside, the quiet broken only by distant traffic. And in that stillness, he faced a truth he had avoided, that marriage was not just built on love, but on honesty. And without it, even the strongest bond could weaken, and by morning he had not slept much, his thoughts looping between memories and doubts. But one thing felt clear. He could not return home, pretending nothing had changed, and when the sun rose, he sat up, staring at the door as if expecting answers to walk through it, knowing that whatever conversation awaited him next would shape the rest of his life. And as he waited in that small motel room, alone with the result he never wanted, Daniel understood that the hardest part was not the test itself, but the courage it would take to face the truth it revealed. Asterisk. Daniel had been staring out the rain-streaked motel window for what felt like hours when the knock came, soft but urgent, cutting through the silence he had built around himself. And when he opened the door, Emily stood there, her coat soaked, hair sticking to her face, eyes red but steady. And without a word she stepped inside, closing the door behind her. And for a moment they just looked at each other, the space between them heavy with everything unspoken. The tension of weeks, the ache of fear, and the weight of secrets finally pressed into the same room, and she sat down on the bed across from him, her hands folded tightly in her lap, while he remained standing, unsure how to begin, unsure how to measure her intentions. But before either of them could speak, she started, her voice soft but fast. It's like she needed to get the truth out before it broke her. explaining that the child the bracelet represented was from a time long before they met. A part of her past she had thought she had buried, that she had made the hardest decision of her life to place the baby for adoption, believing it was the right thing. And that recently the adoptive family had reached out to her, wanting to reconnect, which was why the bracelet had appeared, why the paternity test had come, part of a process she had never imagined would touch their marriage. And as she spoke, Daniel felt a storm of emotions clash inside him, relief that it was not what he had feared, hurt that she had carried this alone, confusion at the intensity of everything happening at once. And yet through it all, he listened, realizing how much fear had shaped her decisions, how much love had guided her choices, even when it meant keeping him in the dark. And when she paused to catch her breath, he finally sat beside her, the mattress sagging under their weight. Both of them silent for a moment, as if letting the air itself settle between them, and he reached out, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face, feeling the familiar softness of her skin, and the connection he thought he had lost flickered back to life, delicate and fragile like a candle in a draught. And she whispered that she had been terrified he would leave, that the secret could destroy everything they had built, that she had wanted him to see her the same way, to trust that she loved him despite the past. And Daniel closed his eyes, swallowing the lump in his throat, realizing that the betrayal he had imagined was never there, only the absence of communication. And the room, with its small fluorescent light and faded wallpaper, felt both confining and safe at the same time. The world outside reduced to the sound of rain on the roof. And as they began to speak, tentative words at first, questions and explanations tumbling out, trying to piece together the weeks of fear and doubt into something that made sense, a sudden sharp knocking interrupted them, loud and urgent, followed by flashing red and blue lights through the thin curtains. And Daniel froze, the blood draining from his face as a new wave of panic took over, heart pounding, mind racing through worst-case scenarios, while Emily gasped beside him, her hands gripping his arm for reassurance. And he moved to the door, peeking through the blinds to see officers standing there, their expressions professional but firm, and the sound of a voice calling out that they were responding to a report of a missing person sent Daniel's chest tightening further, confusion colliding with fear as he realized Emily's phone had been dead. Someone had seen her leave and assumed the worst, and despite the panic, Daniel's mind was working fast, calculating how quickly things could spiral, while Emily tried to explain over the knocks, the words spilling in bursts, trying to calm the officers without making things worse. And after what felt like minutes stretched into hours, the police confirmed that there was no crime, no danger, just a misunderstanding. And Daniel exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he had been holding, the tension in the room melting slightly, replaced with a new, fragile relief. And as the red and blue lights faded into the night, he and Emily sat back on the bed, closer. Now, the silence between them filled not with fear, but with a quiet understanding. And he reached for her hand, holding it tightly as if to anchor both of them, and they began to talk again, gently, tentatively, about the past, the choices that had led them here, and what they wanted for the future. The conversation slow at first, like testing water before jumping in, but with each word the walls between them softened. For the first time since finding the bracelet and the test, Daniel felt a fragile hope that even after secrets and fear, trust could begin again. And though the night was far from over and the world outside still carried uncertainty, inside that small motel room, rain tapping on the roof, two people had begun to reconnect, opening a path toward forgiveness, understanding, and a love tempered by truth. Asterisk morning light filtered weakly through the thin motel curtains, soft and pale against the remnants of the night's tension. And Daniel and Emily sat side by side on the edge of the bed, neither speaking at first, the quiet stretching between them like a fragile bridge over the storm they had weathered. And outside the room, the world had started to wake, distant traffic humming and birds calling in the early hour, while inside, the air smelled faintly of damp carpet and rain-soaked coats, a reminder of the night that had changed everything without harming either of them. And finally, Emily spoke, her voice low but steady. "I should have trusted you from the start." And Daniel looked at her, seeing the vulnerability he had missed before, the mix of fear and love in her eyes. And he realized that he had learned something powerful in the hours since the bracelet and the test. That trust and honesty were not just words, but choices you had to make every day. And he nodded, his own voice soft. "And I should have asked." Instead of running, and the admission hung between them, lighter now, easing the weight that had pressed on their chests for weeks. And as the sun rose higher, spilling warmer light across the thin bedding and faded walls, they began to talk, slowly at first, about the past months, the secrets and the misunderstandings, piecing together the gaps in their relationship, acknowledging hurt and fear without letting it define them. And Daniel listened as Emily explained how she had feared judgment and loss, how the adoption and recent contact had shaken her in ways she did not know how to explain. And he spoke, too, about the nights of doubt, the fear that had driven him into the motel, and how the silence between them had been heavier than any confrontation. And as words flowed, tentative but honest, the tension softened, leaving space for something new. A fragile hope that they could rebuild. Stronger because it was rooted in understanding rather than assumption. And outside, the morning air seemed fresher somehow, carrying away the remnants of storm clouds and tension, while inside Daniel and Emily moved closer, their shoulders brushing, hands eventually meeting a small, deliberate contact that spoke of reassurance and willingness to try again. And they laughed lightly at small memories, acknowledging the past without letting it control the present. The room feeling suddenly alive with possibility. Every sound of the waking world outside reminding them that life continued, and it was. There's two-faced together, not apart, and they made tentative plans for the day, agreeing to go home and talk to family to begin repairing what had frayed. And Daniel realized that fear, even when powerful, could be faced and overcome when honesty guided the way. And Emily's eyes glistened as she promised to share everything moving forward, to let him in completely, not just as a husband, but as a partner who could be trusted with both joy and past pain. And Daniel felt a shift inside, the ache in his chest softening, replaced with warmth and determination, knowing that the future was not erased by mistakes or secrets, only shaped by how they chose to respond. And as they stepped toward the door together, Emily holding his hand tightly, he felt the fragile but real connection between them solidify, ready to face uncertainty, misunderstandings, and life's unexpected turns side by side. And though the motel room would soon be left behind, its walls still echoing the night's revelations, the lessons remained clear and powerful about patience, communication, and the courage to confront difficult truths without letting fear drive choices. And as they walked into the morning light, the sky clearing above, Daniel glanced at Emily and smiled faintly, feeling the steadying presence of love that had survived doubt. The quiet understanding that even after secrets and tests, hearts could heal, trust could return, and two people could step forward together, stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace a life built on truth and shared resilience, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it as one, hand in hand, hearts open, the past no longer a shadow, but a teacher guiding them toward a future that held promise, forgiveness, and the quiet, steady rhythm of love renewed.